Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to determine how much a case is worth in workers' comp. Typically, the way a workers' comp case goes is a person is injured, they report that accident to their employer, and they go and they have medical treatment. Now, it's not always that simple, but that is sort of the ideal workers' comp claim. And the person, depending on how injured they are, is going to treat with maybe 1, 2, 3 different doctors. It just depends on how much treatment they need. And so we'll kind of give you an example. Let's say that somebody has a torn rotator cuff in their shoulder and they've got to go and have an outpatient surgery to treat that. Eventually what's going to happen is that person is going to be released by the doctor, meaning that the person is finished with their treatment. So the doctor is basically saying, I've done all I can for you. There's nothing more we can do to treat your problem. This is as good as you're going to get. And at that point, the doctor is typically going to assign what's called an impairment rating. And that is a number between 1 and 100 that is a percentage. And it says what percentage of that body part has been lost. So, for example, we'll take our hypothetical shoulder injury client. The doctor may say, okay, I've done all I can do for you, and you now have a 15% impairment to the shoulder. All right, and the doctor is supposed to use a book called the American Medical Association Guide to the Evaluation of Permanent Impairment. And the doctor is supposed to look in that book and look up the same type of problem that their current patient has, and it gives them a range of numbers to choose from. What typically happens then is, let's say that a person goes to a workers' comp hearing. Okay, now most workers' comp cases end in a settlement, but the settlement is based on what you think you would get at a hearing. So if I think a person would get a certain amount of money at a hearing, and maybe the defense offers that amount of money or a little bit more than that, even especially, then I would recommend to my client that they take that settlement. So how do we guess what a person would get at a hearing? Okay, and that is sort of the one of the biggest jobs of a workers' comp lawyer, is to be able to look at the evidence of a case and use their experience and their knowledge in dealing with the workers' comp commissioners that we have, and knowing the laws to come up with essentially a professional opinion about how much a case is worth. And typically what the workers' comp commission does is they look at the impairment rating, or sometimes more than one rating, and then they will listen to the injured worker testify. And I typically have my clients talk about things like whether they have any pain, whether they have any limitation in their range of motion, like say for their neck, they can only turn it so far or something like that. How often they have pain, how bad the pain is. Sometimes we put it in on a 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being the worst pain. Whether anything tends to make that pain better sometimes, like holding their body in a certain position, sitting down, taking a rest, taking any kind of medications, and whether anything tends to make that pain worse. And typically we see that with things like lifting, stretching, kneeling down, just depending on the injury. So we get very specific about those things in a workers' comp hearing, and the commissioner essentially looks at the rating, and then based on the testimony and any other evidence in the file, says what that person's award is. It's a little confusing because the award is also expressed as a percentage. Okay, so let's say you have 15% to the shoulder, then a commissioner is going to take that 15%. Typically they're going to add something to that to make it more fair. So maybe they give a person 20% if the person's not having too many problems, or if the person's having terrible problems, they may bump it up to 25 or 30% or even more. And that's sort of the lawyer's job, is to come up with a professional opinion about what a commissioner is likely to do with a particular case. Now, once the commissioner has assigned that percentage, how much money that's worth is just a math problem. Anybody could do that. You just have to know how much the body part is worth at 100%, and then just take a percentage of that. And it's going to be largely determined by a person's compensation rate, and that's a big number in workers' comp. Compensation rate is basically 2/3 of the average weekly pay for that injured worker. Sometimes there are other ways of determining that number if that would not be fair, but that's the basic method. So that's how commissioners come up with a value on a case. Now, the cap in workers' comp in South Carolina is 500 weeks of compensation. That is 500 times that compensation rate we just talked about. And you can't get more than that from any one accident at any one employer. And to get that much, you usually have to be determined to be permanently and totally disabled. Okay? So that means that you can't work anymore, which is thankfully not all that common, but especially when people maybe are a little bit older or they have a little more severe injury, we do see that on a regular basis. Of course, we hope everybody can feel much better and get back to work, but sometimes that just doesn't happen. So if a person is permanently and totally disabled, they're going to get 500 weeks of pay at that compensation rate, and typically they're going to get that in a lump sum. There are a couple of exceptions to the 500-week cap. If the person is permanently and totally disabled as a result of a physical brain injury, okay, that is an injury to the actual tissue of the brain. Maybe they had a severe head injury and it's left them, unfortunately, with a permanent brain injury. Then that is a case where the person will get benefits for the rest of their life. They can, in some cases, get a partial lump sum, so they can get maybe a lump sum of money up front, and then they're going to get weekly checks after that, often for the rest of their life. Another exception is if a person has quadriplegia, meaning they cannot move, they have loss of use of both arms and both legs as a result of a spinal cord injury, or paraplegia, which is typically considered or commonly understood to be paralysis from the waist down. What's interesting about those cases is it does not have to be complete quadriplegia or complete paraplegia. You can have a partial spinal cord injury, and in fact that's a lot more common than most people realize, but as long as it's affecting both legs or both arms, then it's going to be considered to be quadriplegia or paraplegia, even if it's not complete and total paralysis and loss of function. As always, if you have any questions about workers' comp, about the laws here in South Carolina, or about a particular case, just give me a call. My number is 803-5000000, which is 803-5 and all zeros after that. You can call me anytime. We're here working every day. And you can also check us out on the web. Our website is at www.leeinjury.com, and if you go to the workers' comp section of the website, we've got a free guide that I wrote for injured workers, and it sort of explains a lot of this stuff in more detail. If you have any questions about anything in the guide, I'm always happy to talk to you about it. You can send me an email also at tyler@leeinjury.com.